So we're going to start. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here. Oh, and some more people. I'm Peter Kemp. I'm one of the heads of the planning team working for the Great.
Thanks very much, Peter. That's lovely. Crash course in Masterplanning. We're going to introduce today some of the key themes that you'll be exploring if you enter in the challenge, which I assume is why most of you are here. You probably have come past the amazing stall, or the stand, which is, if you look behind you at the end about that. I'm Matt, and this is Fiona, and Lucy's joining us, and we run an organisation called MATT+FIONA, but it's more broadly about working with young people to inspire them about their built environments. So this Masterplanning crash course is going to be just scratching the surface of some of the processes, getting you to think a little bit about how we think about the spaces around us. And I guess the first question is really, we're using this term built environment, but it would be interesting to know in the audience here of what you think makes up your built environment. We use these kind of strange words, often terminology in our various construction professions. So hands up if anyone's got any thoughts about what the built environment might include. Anyone?
There are some clues in the image here. Is it just buildings?
Yeah, there's some front here.
Would there also be like public transport?
Yeah, public transport forms part of that. Any other thoughts?
Is it like infrastructure in general?
Yeah, infrastructure. I guess all of the things that sort of make the images in this picture, the homes, the places we work, the sort of leisure places that we might visit, the shops, the libraries, the galleries, the concert venues, the parks, the transport. So it's all the sort of physical stuff around us in our cities and towns that enables us to kind of live communally. So it's all of these things and many more. And I guess what the challenge is, the Future Design London Challenge by the GLA and MOBI, is to get us to think, or to get you as young Londoners to think really innovatively how the future of our cities might be shaped. We're at a really important time in developing cities now and about developing our world, whether it's sustainability, whether it's the safety of all people in our communities and societies having equal access to those spaces. So it's a really important programme that engages with you. And I guess the built environment and master planning and designing and shaping our cities is something that doesn't happen overnight. It happens on a really sort of quite slow process. So if you think about a new bit of planning in a city or a town, we're talking 5, 10, 15 years maybe till that fully comes to fruition from the very first time that's discussed and thought about. And I guess that's why it's really important that voices of younger people within our communities and societies are involved in that conversation. So I'm just going to sort of touch on the processes that we go on to get to that journey, to this decision making in built environment, or shaping that built environment. And the first one, and you'll be following this if you're involved in the challenge with your groups, the first one is looking at the brief and responding to the brief. And the brief effectively sets out the agenda and the parameters by which you want to shape that piece of city. And then the designers, the architects, the engineers, the mechanical engineers, the construction managers, all get involved in thinking about how you respond to that brief, how you solve that brief, how you organise that bit of city through a process of designing. And then I guess most importantly, then it comes through to a stage of checking. We have lots of regulation in this country to make sure those city spaces have all the right information and infrastructure in them. So they go through a planning process where it makes sure that the decisions, I guess, that the designers have made, that you've made as maybe architects in this challenge, make sense. So there are a right number of schools there for a new housing, that there is residual green space or space left over for us to enjoy our lives, not just to be in our own homes. And then we go through the process of actually making it, the construction, and that can be a very long process. It can be phased and involves loads of other kind of members of the construction industry. And then finally the inhabitation. And often the built environment professionals are sort of some of these kind of key ones, the architects, the planners, the construction managers, but there are many, many more. A question we asked yesterday, but I don't know if anyone else has got friends or relatives or family involved in the construction industry beyond that. It can be a whole range of things. So there are a whole load of professions beyond that. I don't know if anyone's got any family involved in the built environment or construction industries. Anyone got family or friends involved? Yeah. Can you speak up? Sorry.
He does constructions on many different sites.
Yeah, so there's the people that physically actually make those sites. So the guys on the guys and girls on the ground actually physically making those things. Yeah. Anyone else? So there's a whole range of kind of things that are sort of hidden, I guess, behind the scenes, not just these main professions. I'll hand over Fee for a second now.
So given we're going to be designing today, can I ask you all to show with hands, have any of you imagined a space before? Have any of you come up with a design in your mind or thought, I would love it if my bedroom looked like this, or I'd love it if the park looked like that, or what about this new space in school? Has anyone imagined a space? Maybe just to start with, can we just have a show of hands just generally? Sorry, Lucy.
Yeah, amazing, lots of you.
Amazing. Hands down, how many of you have actually made a space? Or designed a space and created a space? Much fewer, but a few people. Can we hear from you what you've designed and made?
I had to design like the kitchen and my living room for my house.
That's incredible. So did you work with your family to come up with the design?
Yeah, I had to work with my mum for it.
That sounds really incredible. So some people might have been lucky enough to actually shape a space already, but that's quite rare. Lots of us haven't. And so through the design challenge, we're hoping that all of you will have the opportunity to design. And that's what Matt and I do, and Lucy do. We help people your age, some younger, some a bit older, to create their own spaces. And these are some examples of the kind of spaces that young people, some of them in London, some of them across the rest of the UK, have created. So we have things like a performance space. We have part of a room for art, the new kind of art room in a school, a playground structure, and an outdoor classroom. And these are just a few examples. But we think that your ideas are absolutely incredible. This proves it. A lot of these designs are way more imaginative than anything adults would come up with. And that's why we think things like Challenge London to come up with your own designs is so important. So, in today's session, we're going to be thinking at two different scales, and we should start by saying what we're going to ask you to do today in the next kind of 45 minutes is what it would take adults to do in at least a year. So bear with us, it's going to be a quick journey, we're going to speed along, but we're going to try and design at two different scales. Macro and micro. Does anyone know what macro means? And micro. Idea over here?
Just bigger, a big plan.
Absolutely, excellent, big. So macro is like thinking about a whole part of a city, a neighbourhood. So it's going to include lots of different spaces, lots of different types of buildings. What about micro? There's a clue on the board. What might micro mean?
Small.
Absolutely, small. So with micro, we're going to be thinking at the scale of a home. So it doesn't have to be a house, it could be a flat, it could be a maisonette, or it could be a completely new way of living. So it's going to be a whistle-stop tour. Are you ready for it? Yes? Okay, back to Matt.
Okay, so we're going to start off with that big picture thinking, and tying into the challenge brief. The challenge brief for two sites, which your teachers will tell you more about. I don't know if you visit the stand over where I pointed before. I think E16, I'm going to say. E16, I'm going to say. Yeah, E16 is correct. So if you go to stand E16, you'll find lots more information about it and online. But the challenge brief is to design, I guess, a master plan and housing for a new area in the Docklands, the two sites. And that's not just the homes, it's the green spaces, the streets and the communal facilities. If you like, all of the built environment infrastructure that we talked about earlier on that goes to make a new community. And I guess it's about getting you to think most imaginatively about how that new piece of city could be generated. And when we think about what a neighbourhood is and what a new community is, we think of not just the housing, but it's also the retail, the shopping, the high streets, the markets, the places that also, as well as the homes that we live in, the sort of micro element of our lives, with our families and carers. But it's also the things that sort of make those new spaces work collectively as communities, where we can all share. And that might be the green spaces, it might be the parks, allotments. It might be to do with leisure. It might be indoor leisure, outdoor leisure, sports facilities, cinemas, theatres. But it could also be the places that we work. And there was a really interesting conversation with lots of people yesterday that boundary between work and home for all of us, both whether as pupils within school or within working environments, employment environments, that those boundaries are shifting and might really shape how we rethink about that home and work relationship. But it's also the transport, if you like, the things that help us move around the city. Probably most of you come today by, I would imagine, by some form of public transport, maybe by train. Thinking about when you're making a new community, how you stitch that in with the rest of the city or the town within which it's encompassed. And then the educational space is really critical to new communities. The spaces that allow that community to flourish, where there are nurseries, and making sure those places are thought about right from the word go, so they can be sustainable places where everyone can enjoy. And then there's lots of other stuff, which was lovely in the conversations we had yesterday. All of the other sort of things that make that place particular and special. Fee?
So, some of you have already investigated your envelopes. If you've yet to open up your envelope, can you do so now and have a look inside? There should be, alongside the fun planning comic, there should be 2 A3 sheets, A3 activity sheets. And if you can find the one that looks like it's got a map on it, so the macro one, it says macro in the top left, if you can find out that sheet to start with, what we'd like you to do in the next 30 seconds, that's the one, yep, is to, on that right-hand side, list down what for you are the top 8 things that in your community or in your neighbourhood that you're designing you would like there to be. So there are lots of ideas up here, but we know that your imaginations and your ideas are incredible. So just because you don't see your idea up here doesn't mean it's great. So put down any new ideas that you might have as well for what in your master plan, in your macro, when we're thinking about the whole community, what you'd like there to be. So in the next 30 seconds, just have a bit of a think, do some blue sky thinking, some green sky thinking, and decide what's going to appear in your master plan. And the aim of this is to be really quick. When you actually do the main challenge, you can have much more time to think this through. But today is just be instinctive. What does your gut tell you that you want to have in your community?
It might be something that you have in your own community already, something that you think is really important or special, or something that you think is missing from where you live, what you would like.
And that point that Fiona was saying about the time, I think one of the interesting things is about the design challenge is it's actually going to give you that time to be able to think about that. And some of these decisions will be determined partly by the brief. So when you get a brief as a designer, you're given some parameters and some requirements that you need to fulfill in order to make that workable for the client, for the city, for example. But ultimately, the clever trick is for you as designers to bring in your individual take on that makes it special for you and the community you're designing for. How are you all doing? Almost there? Looks like most people have got a good number down.
Would anyone like to be really generous and share with us one of their ideas? Yes.
Right, am I able to say something that I wouldn't want there?
Absolutely, yeah, that's important.
I wouldn't want anti-homeless architecture.
Say that again, you wouldn't want?
I wouldn't want anti-homeless architecture.
Absolutely, amazing idea, amazing idea. Can you expand on that? What to you means anti-homeless architecture?
Things such as benches and things put in place to make homeless people sleeping there or staying there very difficult to drive them out. So they built benches specifically so they're uncomfortable, and then they put like sort of spikes on the floor so they don't sleep under bridges and places where they would find shelter.
Incredible idea, and I think that's something you should absolutely follow through in your brief. Brilliant, thank you. Any other ideas, either things that you really don't want the neighbourhood to include or things that you really do want it to include? One over here, do you have an idea? Gentleman just here. Do you have an idea?
No, I'm all right.
Okay.
No idea.
Anyone
Is that
else?
okay?
Anyone on this side?
I think there was one over there, just there in the middle.
Two over there.
Okay, perfect.
I put sufficient houses with lots of space, because if there's one thing that London needs to improve on, it's house space. We've got some of the smallest houses pretty much everywhere. So yeah, house space is really nice.
You're so right, and the year that we've all been through has really hit home how that's got to be improved.
I'd say retail, but small boutiques rather than big chains. And also within green spaces, having parks that are enclosed, but also open spaces where people feel more free rather than trapped with a game.
Fantastic, yeah, absolutely.
I'd love for there to be a communal centre which includes stuff such as helping independent businesses grow, especially within the community. And I also believe that there should be, to help young people find maybe apprenticeships or work experience, because I know that a lot of young people want to learn, but sometimes they find it difficult to find how they do that.
There are a lot of the London Mayor's Office planners are here, and I think lots of you could just go and apply for jobs straight away if you want. So if you speak to the people at the back of the room, they'll be able to help you. But absolutely such incredible ideas, and this is exactly what the challenge is about.
I think this idea also that almost without exception, all of those comments about things that are the sort of caring glue that brings and makes real kind of communities, and I think that's a testament to your vision as young Londoners. And often it's some of those things that are pushed to the side in decision making for all sorts of reasons, financial, various other reasons. And I think it's really important that your voice is heard. So great, make sure those are all part of ultimately your plans.
So we are going to speed on now to that's the start of the brief that you were all creating there, was setting what you want this community to be able to do. And it's also going to think about housing, the types of housing that you want. So you can see some examples on the screen. It can include individual houses. It can include terraced houses, that means houses that are joined together. It can include groups of housing. It can also think at higher density. So by that we mean homes that are stacked on top of each other, that mean that you're creating flats, either in blocks or in towers, where there may be advantages of the views that you can get, or that you can create a tighter community. But these are all your ideas to decide what you want the housing to be like.
And I guess there's something also about then within that the sort of zoning, and that's where we're going to come on to this next exercise in a second, but actually how we think on a very large scale about the decision making of where we put our various elements. This is a picture of a huge master plan in China, so whether you choose to keep living and education from learning from sort of civic infrastructure separate, or where you want to take, next slide, you want to take a much more mixed idea about how you bring things together. But then also thinking, this is a strange diagram, this is about the cycle of a city in 24 hours. So it's thinking about activity. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. So time along the top, and different activities. So the market grows during the day and then comes down. Cinema, nothing for the cinema, but very busy at night. So we have to remember that our spaces in our cities particularly have these very different 24-hour cycles, and parts of the day the nature of a city might completely change. determined by the functions and activities that are in it. And so those paces and those rhythms of the day are really important thinking about your master plan, particularly if you can be clever about thinking about how spaces function in more than one way. So a park might be really a useful space for quiet relaxation, but it also could be a space for sport, recreation and leisure, and you think about those single spaces working in lots of different ways cleverly.
So, if you go back to having a look at the activity sheet in front of you, you will hopefully recognise this plan, this bird's eye view of a pretend part of the city. So when you come to do your actual challenge brief, you will obviously choose a real place. But just for this exercise today, we're imagining this area, and this is where you are designing your new master plan for your community. Around the edge are lots of things that might help inform what you want your master plan to be like. So for example, housing, Lucy's marked out in yellow, so you can see where there's existing housing on the edge, on the fringes of your master plan. You can also see you've got a big green space here, so you might want to think about what do you want to have connecting to that big green space. And then you've got an area where lots of people work up here. In your envelope, you've hopefully also found a set of highlighters. Can you all find out the green highlighter pen? And the first thing that we are going to think about is infrastructure. That was a great word that someone over here mentioned earlier on. Infrastructure is all the ways that you circulate and move around your master plan. Now, for the purpose of time, we've already added a proposal for where the main thoroughfares through the master plan might be. But when you do the build challenge, the design challenge, you can come up with your own. We're going to move swiftly on to thinking about green space, which we've already talked about. Using the green highlighter, can you mark on your plan, and there is no right or wrong answer, I'm going to change the slide so you can't see where we put the green space. There is no wrong answer, there are only right answers for where you would like the green space to go. So in the next minute, can you use your green highlighter to decide on the master plan, where would you like your green space to go? And that might depend or look very different, depending on, some of you might have had a football pitch on your list of things that your neighbourhood needed. Now yesterday, Matt, were you saying that a football pitch might be...
Someone was talking about wanting a stadium, which was slightly different thing, but that's a huge thing. I think the thing to bear in mind, we're asking you to sort of colour these in by squares, but for way of example, this teeny weeny little thing there, that's a small family house with for maybe 4 or 5 people. So in a little terrace there. So by way of example, each one of those squares is a large thing. So we're asking you to do it sort of quite simply, I guess, at the moment. But yeah, I mean, a stadium would be very large, but I think there are other things. I mean, I don't know whether Lucy wants to add. There are other things to think about the sort of way in which you're thinking about where that green space sits, whether it's the centre, whether it's linking up existing bits of green space. That's a really sometimes an important thing, Lucy.
Yeah, you might want to think about, like Matt said, there is existing green space on all sides of this map, and maybe you want to create a kind of spine through your master plan that connects those green spaces, or that sits in between the houses, so it's not just areas of park, but it's a kind of garden city, perhaps.
And I think we said to the group yesterday, it's really lovely, I can see you're all jumping straight in, which is exactly the idea. And when you come to the challenge brief, sometimes, even when you've got more time, sometimes just jumping in something intuitively after you've thought about, or after you've informed yourself by reading the brief and the information that you need, sometimes intuitively jumping into an idea is a really good way of getting started. Just like a blank sheet of paper is often daunting when you've been asked to write a story or do something at school or write an essay. Actually, same with design. Sometimes it's making a few marks on a piece of paper that you can look at and then react. And ultimately, the process of design is one that we would call an iterative process, where we go backwards and forwards, refining and refining. So don't be afraid just to do that. And also don't be afraid to break the rules. We said to the group yesterday, it's really lovely to see all of you taking very different approaches to this. And we've said that there's this sort of grid of squares for this exercise, and some of you completely ignored that, and that's lovely. That's part of the brief. Fiona and I were just saying that with Lucy, we were very privileged to win a competition last week for a new project in the city, working with a group of young people. And actually we won that, I think, just by looking at the brief that we've been given by our client and saying, that actually doesn't make sense, you should be thinking about it this way. And sometimes challenging a brief is a really important role of a designer, because the person writing the brief maybe has not thought about it, or the people writing the brief haven't thought about it in a particular way. And that's what your individuality, listening to all of your comments earlier on, has been so inspiring, that you clearly have a very socially driven agenda, kind of environmentally driven agenda to kind of how you want to see your cities. And that might be different from the people who are commissioning.
So if we said you have 10 seconds left to decide where the green space is going, hopefully that doesn't fill you with too much fear. But as we say, this is something you're going to return to and investigate in more detail. So the next colour to look for is pink in your highlighters. And with pink, we are thinking about everything that's not residential. So by that we mean everything that's not housing, everything that's not homes, flats. So that could include educational spaces like schools. It could include recreational spaces, so sports centres, swimming pools, ice skating rinks, cinemas. It can include restaurants, cafes. It could include all of the amazing types of spaces that I think lots of you are thinking about that are in that in-between zone that maybe we don't yet have a common name for. But hopefully during your lifetime, these kind of spaces, these community spaces, will become much more prevalent in our cities. So with the pink highlighter, think about where on your master plan those kind of spaces that generally bring people together maybe should go. And now that you've got your green space, you might want to think about, well, if I'm planning an area that's got shops and restaurants and cafes, do I want it to look on to my green space? Or actually, do I want it to feel more urban? And by urban, I mean an area that's got more buildings or hard surfaces around. And do you want them all together? Or do you want to create pocket neighbourhoods within your master plan where maybe on every street corner there is a shop or a restaurant or a community hub that brings people together? Or would you prefer that they're all grouped in one zone? And again, there's no wrong answer, so just trust your instinct and have a go.
And when you're doing your design challenges, it could be important to look at the site around the master plan and see what's there and what you think is missing, because you don't want to kind of repeat elements, but you want to kind of think what that area needs and how you can bring that.
As a reminder, some of those things are on there, but you had lots of really good ideas yourselves when you're thinking about what those things could be. Obviously, in reality, when you do the challenge brief, lots of those elements will be considered separately as quite defined things, but we've obviously, because we're working for a short period of time, we're asking you to think about that just as one group of things.
Does the pink include stuff like, park playgrounds for the younger kids?
I would think probably the park playgrounds would exist within the green infrastructure. So if you, but again, if
I
it is
can see you're putting that within your green space, which is a good idea. Yeah, you can add over or change things as you go. If something seems like a better layout.
We're aware of time, and time is always sadly quite pressing when creating the built environment, although this is quite extreme that in 45 minutes you're designing a city quarter, and I think that's incredibly impressive. But we are going to continue to move on. So the next stage of the master plan is to be thinking about where are the homes going. And there's lots to think about in terms of homes. Firstly, you want to be thinking about, are you imagining low-rise homes? So things that might be buildings that might be 2 or 3 stories tall maximum? Or are you thinking about taller towers that might be more like 5 or 10, 15, 20, 25 stories tall? Lucy's come up with this really lovely way of differentiating between the two. So using the yellow marker, you can delineate where the housing's going. But if it's tall housing, then you can put a line through anything that you're imagining being taller than about 5 stories. to show that that's where you're imagining what we call high density housing.
Someone mentioned earlier about more space in houses, so maybe you want to think with the higher density houses, perhaps they don't have such good access to green space, so maybe you would think about putting them near a green space or near open spaces.
And remember that lighting is really important to homes. So if you're thinking about within your home wanting to make sure that every room has a window, a way to let light in, a way to, an openable window that can let air in, you might want to be thinking about making sure that you're not creating huge blocks like this, maybe this pink one, which in this diagram is non-residential. Because then you might imagine there could be a home that's stuck in the middle of that block, and how are you going to let light in smaller blocks or terraces that are going to ensure that you have that access to light and air in your homes.
Amazing seeing the master plans coming together. I can't believe you've managed to do it so quickly. How long we got? Okay. I mean, how long we got left on this?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. So in the last 30 seconds, think about those spaces and think about the differentiation between them. And then we'll have a quick pause. We'd love to see them all, so we'll talk about how we're going to do that. You all doing okay? It looks like you're still going, so yeah. And then think about that density as well.
And I know it can be really frustrating when someone's telling you to speed up, but with all the amazing ideas you've got, just try and hold on to those. Maybe even note them down, because you'll have much longer for the main challenge brief, and so you can make sure you incorporate all of the ideas and sparks and curiosity that are coming out at the moment.
So 10 seconds. Okay, should have the countdown timer on. There's some really interesting ways of seeing the space here. I can see, at least in the front running, just about getting a glimpse further back. Really different approaches, which is lovely to see. And I think that when you're thinking about the challenge brief, this idea that, you know, you will be looking at those things now and thinking, oh, maybe that doesn't quite make sense. And that process of sort of self-reflection as a designer is a really important one. That you look at that and then you almost challenge yourself and say, do those things make sense? And you can do that a number of times, and each time you do that iteration, that version, it starts to make more and more sense. Okay.
So, time is up. Can you finish the last bit of colouring that you're doing and then put the lid back on the pens? From where Matt and I are at the moment, we can already see that there are some incredible master plans appearing, and they're all so different. Because, I mean, we would love to be able to go around every single one of you and hear more about your design, but we simply haven't got time today. So, because there's quite a few adults at the back who'd love to see them, first of all, can you hold your plans up in the air so that Matt and I can see them? Amazing. All hands up, can we see them all? Fantastic. Incredible. And now can you turn your plans round so that all the adults at the end can see your incredible design? So if you can face them that way, that would be fantastic. And have a look at each other's. I don't think I can see a single master plan that looks the same as anyone else's. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Hands down. So those master plans, take them with you and allow them to inform your thinking for your main master plan that you're going to do.
Does anyone want to reflect briefly on any things that have come out of that they were thinking about within the master plan, or that's changed the way they might think about having done that's something they might do differently, or thinking they've thought about things differently? Anyone got any suggestions, or thinking about maybe people that spoke before and said about certain elements they were imagining in there? Has that changed how you would think about that?
Maybe this is something to follow up and talk about with your groups and with your teachers back in school and college. So now on to micro.
So from a micro perspective, we're going to try and get you to completely think at the other end of that scale. So we've been thinking about a whole part of a new city, which is about, really as much as anything, thinking about the interrelationship of lots and lots of people from different families and different groups and different organisations. And now we're going to think about the micro, the planning of a single home and how that might be constituted or made up, brought together. And that is informed as designers, hopefully by our own experience, our own lived experience of the homes that we've maybe lived in, but also about thinking about more broadly and looking at lots of different ways in which people live. And the challenge brief specifically, I guess, is focused around the idea of designing a master plan for new housing and to think about that really innovatively and radically. Now we're going to show you some examples of housing today, and you're going to have a go at thinking about the prioritisation of those decisions in your own minds. But we're doing that in quite a simple way, a bit like with the master plan. But today you'll be able to look around this expo and see lots and lots of organisations and companies involved in doing lots of innovative things that could shape our new homes in a very radical and different ways, and should do. But you as designers, in response to the challenge brief, hopefully will do the same. Back at the GLA stand, the MOBI stand, for Future Design London, you will be able to also have a go at thinking about making models of radical kind of new homes. There's an amazing paper folding challenge and another design home challenge that you can pop through during the day. But as we touched on before, there are these different types of kind of housing. And these we're showing you kind of ones that have been built. Actually, you could imagine lots more, maybe more radical ways. And I think that's a really important thing to think about as designers. You need to think about how you radically change the future of the city. So is all housing above ground? Does some of it float? All the sites have connection to water. Do you change how you think about the houses? Are the spaces like the roofs of our cities and our houses spaces that could become active, could become gardens, could become environments? So we want you to think radically about how you reconfigure that.
So I can see we've just got 10 minutes left. So we're going to go swiftly to our second activity sheet, the micro one, which is looking at the scale of a home. And if you can all find out that sheet and have that in front of you. Now, obviously when you do your challenge brief, you will be able to think about the whole housing and whether you want to have any blocks like this or if you want everything actually to be low density. But for the purpose of today, we are imagining that we are going to design one of the flats in this block. And for example, there are 3 flats on a floor, and you can see that this is how you access them. Does anyone know what that symbol and that symbol are? We're still in bird's eye view here, looking down. We're imagining that we're flying around up here, looking down.
Ways to get into the house, such as stairs and lifts?
Absolutely right. This is how you draw stairs on a plan. This is how you show the lifts. So of course accessibility is something that you're going to want to think about in your housing. So then coming to the flat itself, we would like you to have a go at shaping, designing what the inside of this particular home looks like. And as a quick starting point, you might want to, on the right-hand side on your sheet, note down what spaces do you want to have in your homes. We've all become so familiar with our homes over the last year, the last 18 months. We probably all can think of the kind of spaces that maybe are currently missing in home design, and now is an opportunity to note those down. So you might have established spaces, like you might want to include specific bedrooms. We would recommend that a space of this size has room for 2 bedrooms, but you don't have to include 2 bedrooms, it could be less. It might be hard to include more. You might want a bathroom, you might want a kitchen, you might want a living space, but equally you might want to reinvent how we live and throw all of that out the window and come up with something completely different and new. So in the next 5 minutes, can you have a go at, first of all, noting down what are the spaces that you're going to try and include in your home, and then have a go at deciding where they should be within the plan of your flat. Other things to think about are you've got a park in this direction, so you might want to think about the views and the relationship of the spaces to the park. There's more housing on this side, and then you've got the busy street front here. So there might be parts of your home that you think that needs to be really private, and you might want that to overlook the park. There might be other parts that you think, I want that to have a connection to the buzz of the street and the neighbourhood.
You're all jumping in straight away, which is amazing, and I can see you're doing so well at that. Just so you reference, each one of those squares is about a metre, so give you a clear frame of reference in terms of the size of that.
Also on the right-hand side of the page, there's a list of 6 things that you might want to fill in that you think are really important to making a good home. And you can do those any time during this activity.
Just been informed that we have an extra 5 minutes for this activity. So that gives a bit more time to consider how you want your home to be. So perhaps do spend the time, the first couple of minutes, really thinking about what kind of spaces you're going to include in your home. And if anyone is feeling brave and generous and would like to share an idea for a space that they're going to include in their home that maybe is quite new, quite unusual, something that isn't in an existing home, it would be lovely if you'd like to share that.
You could add more lists for like the disability people and also the buggy people with buggies.
Really wonderful idea. Yeah, we know that our cities are not nearly as accessible as they should be. So thinking about how do people who are maybe in a wheelchair or people who have buggies for children, how are they going to move, not just move around the inside of the home, but how is that going to connect up with the rest of your master plan to make sure that those people can access every part of the master plan?
And I think in the same way that your city has rhythms and paces and different things going on at different times of the day, so does your house. So or your home, and think about the spaces where you can maybe, if you want to benefit from opening up more space, the spaces that can overlap one another and where you can do similar activities at different times of day. So you might eat in the same place as you might relax, or you might not. You might choose for that to be very separate. And I think one of the challenges, as we've all faced in the last 18 months of working from home or schooling from home, that we've seen that we actually need space sometimes dedicated and private when more than one of us are doing that, working together.
Also, just to say, you might notice all the squares around the house extend. If you want to push out of the existing boundary and create a balcony or a green space, maybe that connects into the living room or bedroom or another space.
Did we have an idea over here?
Yes.
Or you?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, I think we're showing you a sort of rectilinear box, which is a sort of recommended, it's a bit more generous, but recommended sort of size for that area within the mayor's guidance for designing new homes. But you might think about radically how you change that, and hopefully part of the challenge brief is to get young Londoners to think really innovatively and really radically about that, not just in terms of how a home should be planned, but actually how it might feel and how it might look, how it deals with all sorts of things like sustainability, access, all of these things which become incredibly important to making our cities more sustainable, but also more equitable for everyone equally.
You might also want to think about the purpose of walls and doors. So pre-COVID, when perhaps a lot of us spent less time in our homes, you've probably heard of the concept of open plan living. And so lots of the flats that we've been building in our cities, there are no walls between the kitchen or the living room or the spaces where we might work. But you might want to reflect on and think about how has your home worked during COVID, and actually, do we need areas that are private, or do we need flexibility within our spaces? Do you want to have walls that move, that enable a space to become more private if you want to study in peace and quiet and you've got a younger brother and sister who might want to play or be watching TV? So remember that in the same way that Matt was explaining to us with that diagram, how over the course of 24 hours, cities can be used in multiple different ways, and if we're clever, the same space might be able to be used for the full 24 hours. In your home, that might be the same. So it might be that at breakfast time, your home works completely differently to in the middle of the day when it might become a home office, and then in the evening perhaps it goes back to being somewhere really communal where the family come together and do different kind of activities in the evening.
I think probably you've got about 30 seconds. So be finishing up this exercise at least. Again, very much an exercise of iteration when you get to do the design challenge. But lovely to see some of those designs emerging.
Given we have a little bit more time now and all of the ideas that have been shared so far have been absolutely incredible, maybe as you're just doing final touches, have a think about if you would like to share your design and talk it through with the rest of us, share or some of the ideas that you're exploring. Don't worry if it's not a finished idea. As I say, this is something that people working in this field would spend a year doing what we've asked you to do in 45 minutes. But if anyone would like to share their work in progress, we would really love to hear your ideas. So perhaps final 10 seconds. And let's finish there. Absolutely incredible. I can see some people are still drawing away. That's a really tough thing that we've asked you to do, and well done for everyone for engaging so much with it. Would anyone like to share what they've done?
Or an idea from it, from your design that you want to share that's particular, you think, to the house that you've designed? Yeah.
In mine, I put a little cave quite close to it, so the students can go in there to I guess revise or something, or do their homework.
Yeah, that's really nice. You've been thinking about not just in the home, but what connects to the home, the infrastructure around that.
Really good. One just here.
I think having places you can work in, for when it's a nice day but you're still stuck at home is quite important, because especially during COVID, you couldn't leave the house, so you almost felt like you were wasting your time.
Yeah, definitely. This increased requirement for thinking about the home space as at least part of the day being somewhere that you can work from. Really important, flexible working. Yes, in the middle over here.
Since the flat was on the top floor, I put in skylight roofs to go over the living room and the dining room.
Really lovely idea, and this is the thing, that with what we've been asking you to do today, it's all been very two-dimensional. We've been working just in drawings, but we would really encourage you, when you do the main brief, to think in 3D, make models that can really show how the spaces work. And actually, after this, there's an ongoing drop-in workshop all day over underneath the We've Missed You sign, a paper form workshop where you can have a go at making your spaces in 3 dimensions and really thinking about where does the light come in, how does it connect to the spaces around, what are the views in and out. Any other ideas? Yeah?
So basically there's an office, and then there's a window that has a corner on it, so it's a lot of space, because when people are working and then they're inside too much, so they have a big window.
Such a nice idea. Can I come and work in that space, please?
I can see you've got it overlooking the park as well, so you can imagine having a beautiful view.
I tend to find myself zoning out quite a lot, so next to one of the bedrooms I put a quiet or sensory space, just to zone out and just have some time to yourself.
That's a really lovely idea, and sensory, thinking about space in terms of all of our senses is really important. I think generally we're quite a visual culture, but actually space in terms of what do you hear, what's the sound like, what's the temperature like, what does it feel like to be in that space, is just as important as what it looks like. So really excellent idea. Any others?
I have a adjoining living and kitchen space, because I think that it's very useful to have them open rather than have walls that split them. Because if you're making food and you want to eat, then you can also eat in the living living room, which I think is good, which I think is probably good spatial usefulness, efficiency, sorry.
Absolutely, and some really strong built environment language there as well, spatial efficiency, great.
I put bedrooms away from the street to sort of think about how sort of outside noise affects quality of living.
That's so important, and I think all of us, our sleep is so important to us, so thinking about how we can really maximise that is great. Well, absolutely amazing. I mean, there are so many ideas. Can I ask if everyone would be happy to hold up their planners and share them so that we can see them all again? First of all, Matt and I can be selfish, we can have a look this way first. Really fascinating.
Yep, as ever, very different approaches to things. And again, when it comes to the real design challenge brief, you can be much more radical about the shape of the homes. You might not want homes to be rectangular. And then let's switch it the other way, so we can keep a look at the other side of the back.
Everyone to the back. So there's lots of people watching. Amazing. Thank you so much. So do keep those sheets. They'll become reference points for the next stage of the brief. What we've done today has been an absolute whistle-stop tour, and your ideas have been absolutely incredible, but you will have much more time to come up with considered responses.
This workshop and a whole raft of kind of amazing toolkit elements are all available through the Design Future London kind of website. And again, your teachers will be able to tell you more details about that, but being involved with the challenge, there's a whole range of things that are going to help support you thinking about those things. But thank you again for coming today. Really lovely to see such inspired ideas, and I guess young Londoners thinking really positively about how our future cities should be shaped. A little bit of sort of final housekeeping other than say thank you. I think as you go out, we'll probably exit from the groups at the back first. Jill is standing at the back there, who's been holding one of the microphones, now has a big plastic container. Could I ask you to drop your pens off with her, ideally in their packets? Everything else you can take with you, so all of the drawings and things like that you've been doing with us and the leaflets you can keep. And do make sure that you pop by after or during seeing all this amazing stuff to stand E16 to find out more about the challenge and to get involved in more workshops today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and Lucy, and do come and see us at the